So as I mentioned in the previous video, if you're not catching in that shallow water, what do you do then? Where's your next sort of go-to line? For me, the safest option is down the track in the deeper water. You know, you're trying to figure out in the spring, or any time of the year for that matter, where are the fish? You know, if you're not getting bites somewhere, they have to be somewhere else. You've got to try and find them fish as quickly as possible. So either, you know, if you're in a match situation, you're catching quicker, you're building that weight up, or if you're just enjoying your day and your pleasure fishing, you want to be catching more fish. So you've got to locate them to start with. So, you know, we're imagining we've been across on that first initial line, we've not caught any fish. How do I go about approaching this line, and why would I, you know, drop into that deeper water? Well, it's got a little bit of chill to it today, so that could be one reason why the fish sit in a little bit deeper water. When the weather's warm, they're going to sit a little bit closer up and sun themselves. They're more inclined to sit across in the shallower water. But today, a little bit of chill on it, wind's a little bit chilly, them fish might just be sat in that deeper bit. So we're going to look at how to approach that. This time of the year, you want to be looking for sort of centre of the track. Now, right down the middle of the canal, it's probably going to be the deepest part of the canal. So that's where I want to be targeting. Reason for this is I could be loose feeding maggots on that line today. That's going to be our option. And they're always going to roll to that deepest little bit of the canal. Now, when it's warmer, you might want to get out of that, because that is also where the silt congregates. Everything's going to drop into that. But because the fish are not that active, it doesn't matter so much this time of the year. They're not going to be blowing the bottom about. They're not going to be causing you line bites and foul hookers and stuff like that. So we can get away with it. When they're more active, that's when you might look to say fish further, what people would say, up the shelf or on the slope. But this time of year, we're staying away from that. We're just going for the deepest part of the canal, and hopefully that's where we're going to get most of our bites. Now, we're not going to choose to fish straight in front of us either, and you might say again, why are you not going to do that? Well, the reason for that is that's where most people fish. Most people come on and they throw the bait straight in front of them because it's convenient. You know, they don't have to fish as far, they can just go out 5 or 6 metres out and throw the maggots there. When people fish shallow in the summer months, again, that's where they're going to choose to fish. But we're looking to catch these fish on the bottom, and where people generally throw the bait, like I said before, the silt congregates there, you generally find there can be a little bit of a divot in the actual lake bed itself. So we're trying to avoid that. We want a nice flat dinner plate, just like what we was looking for across. We're looking for exactly the same down the bottom. So when we're plumbing up, we're fishing about 1 metre to the right of straight in front of us. So if you like, we're fishing at sort of 5 past to 10 past on a clock face, and we're just trying to find where the bottom is as flat as possible but the deepest part, and that's where we're going to choose to fish today. So let's have a look at the actual rig itself for that line. On this deep water line, again, we're going to use pink hydro because it's soft and forgiving, and exactly the same reasons as before. We're coming out of them winter months and we want it to be a little bit forgiving so we're not bumping fish. Again, it's probably classed as a light hollow elastic. Line is exactly the same, 017 main line. Got a little back shot there, which again is just to control the line from the tip to your float. We don't want that line bowing off and creating like a sail effect, because that's going to pull your float out of position. So the back shot is purely there just to control it. Float's a little bit different on this. It's a little bit heavier. It's a 0.45 of a gram. Reason being, we've got about 4.5, 5 foot of water. So like I said before, for every foot of water, 0.1 gram of a float is about roughly a good guide, I would say. It's got a carbon stem on this float, and the reason for using a carbon stem is it's got no weight in it. So my float will lie flat on the surface, and the bulk of my shot will have to pull my float over. What this does when you're fishing with maggots, it gives you that slightly slower fall. So it gives good presentation, and it just slows up that fall of the hook bait. Moving down the actual rig, we come to a bulk of shot. Now, the reason we have a bulk is just to get the main part of the rig down. It gives a bit of stability to the rig, and it just creates less tangles. It's nice and simple and really effective. Underneath that bulk, which is just a bulk of number 9 shot, by the way, we're going to have dropper shots. And with dropper shots, we've got them spread 6 inch below my bulk, another 6 inch below that, we've got another one, and then from there to my hook is a 6 inch measurement as well. So basically, I've got 2 number 10 dropper shots. They're spread 6 inches apart, and that just gives a nice slow fall to the bottom 18 inches of the rig, or the bottom third of the rig. Moving down to hook length, now we're going to have our shot about 6 inches away. Some people would like to use a 6 inch hook length just to simplify my own fishing, I use a 4-inch. I don't think it matters that much. You know, the water's a little bit more coloured now, so I have a 4-inch hook length, and that hook length material is 011 end gauge, 017 end gauge main line, and the hook itself is an 18's SLWG, and we're going to be fishing double maggot on that. And that's the rig. Dead simple, but dead efficient as well. So we've talked about the rig, we've talked about where we've chosen to fish. Now we've got to think about how we're going to catch the fish. Maggot fishing is a lot more simpler than what people make it. You've basically got two options of feeding. You can either loose feed by hand, so take a few maggots and you throw them in your swim, and that's one way of attracting fish. That's a great way of attracting fish because you've got the noise factor, which can draw fish in, and you're spreading it over a bigger area as well. So you can actually draw more fish into your peg like this. But again, we've got to think about the conditions. You're coming out of winter, the fish are not feeding as strongly. You can quite easily overfeed your peg like this as well. So what I'm going to start off with initially is double maggot on the hook, and the other option of feeding, what I spoke about, is actually potting the bait. So I'm going to take 2 maggots, put them on the hook, just hook them nice and light. You don't want to bust your maggots. Take my maggots, and I've got a medium guru pot on here, and basically that will hold around about 40 maggots. But same as before, I'm not filling it right up to the brim, so they're bouncing out and spilling and all the rest of it. I'm just going to fill my pot up, probably, I would say, this far from the surface. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to dunk my pot under the water, nice and quickly, sort of push it through the water, and that will suck the maggots back into your pot. So when I'm shipping out now, I'm not going to spill any maggots. And then all I'm going to do is ship out, put my pole together, and I'm just going to, the reason I'm potting it is for accuracy. So what I'm going to do now is lay my rig out of the way, and I'm basically going to turn my pot round and just empty them maggots nice and quick. And they'll just come out in one nice area. I can draw my float back onto where I'm fishing and just hold it. And because it's a carbon stem, you just get a nice slow fall, and it gives time for fish to see the bait falling. Once my rig's settled there now, I just want to leave it still again. So I'm getting a little indication there. Could be some nuisance fish. It looks like a little pulley. So again, a little indication straight away. There's quite a few nuisance fish, what I'll call nuisance fish in this lake. Rudd, little gudgeon, roach, things like that. But once them bigger fish move in, they'll push them out. And that's the beauty of maggots, is you can be quite aggressive with it. You know, everything will eat maggots. So yes, you can overfeed your peg, but you can feed more than you would with pellets. So that was a little bite there then. So I'm just going to lay my rig back in. You know, if I feel like I'm not feeding enough bait, there's quite a lot of fish there, then I can introduce a few by hand. And this is why you don't want to fish too far to start with on these canals. 5-6 metres, just where you can loose feed it by hand, and it gives you that second option of feeding. But to start with, we're just going to keep it nice and tight, feed it via a pot, see what happens, gauge your response from there. If we feel like there's more fish in his peg, we can loose feed a little bit. If we're catching steady, you know, let's be realistic, we're in spring, we're not fishing for massive weights of fish yet. You know, we're not trying to catch them too quickly, probably not going to come up off the bottle on us. So sometimes it's just a case of getting a bite, starting again, and just maintaining a steady catch rate. So there we go, first fish. Nice and steady onto the roller. What you've got to remember with maggots, they're a live bait. They crawl out of your peg. So them maggots I fed before, you know, they might not be in and around where I was fishing. They could well be there. You know, they won't move too far at this time of the year because the water is still quite cold. But they will crawl out of your peg slightly. So, nice little start there. What I'd call a stocky fish, just a bit bigger than a pound, little fat little thing. Nice chunky belly on him. Been eating some pellets and maggots throughout the winter, hopefully. So again, repeat the process now. What am I going to do now? You've caught a fish, what do you do now? Well, same as pellets, same as any style of fishing. You repeat the process until something changes. you carry on doing what works. So again, fill my pot just below the lip, give it a little dunk just to stop your maggots bouncing out. This sort of distance, it's not necessary really, but I'm just trying to get you into a good habit, because if you're fishing maggots in long pole, fishing in say open water lakes, and you're shipping at a further distance, it's just a good thing to get into the habit of doing. So I'll empty my maggots, draw my rig back to where I'm fishing, and then hold it right on top of them maggots. Let my rig naturally settle up, and then we're fishing again. And like I said, until something changes, you know, I'm not going to do anything different. When we start getting fish in our peg and we start missing bites on a regular basis, sometimes it means your bait is too tight, and that's when I'd be looking then to loose feed, just to try and spread the fish out and make sure that I'm keeping enough bait in that peg to keep the fish happy. Right, so there you see, I've now caught a few small fish. So what this is telling me is I'm not getting enough bait into my peg. I basically need to change my feed. I'm feeding via a pot, and the fish basically are rushing in, the smaller fish, and the bigger fish are not getting a look in because there's not enough bait there. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to talk you through loose feeding and why I would do that. So as you can see, we started getting a few nuisance fish now. All of a sudden, you're thinking, right, I've potted a bit of bait, I've caught some fish, great, everything's going to plan, just like Andy said. All of a sudden, I'm not catching. What do I do now? So when you're just potting bait, you're not drawing as many fish in. It's great for keeping your bait nice and accurate and catching what is there. But if there isn't any more fish there, they've sort of scattered, then you need to know what to do, and that's when loose feeding can come into play. Not just with maggots, but with any bait. You know, the beauty of loose feeding is you're creating noise. So I've took that pole pot off now. What I'm going to start doing is loose feeding a few maggots by hand. If you was fishing further, you can loose feed them by a catapult. But now that noise factor is just hopefully going to draw some fish in from afar that you're not attracting the attention of when you're actually potting bait. So double maggot again. So I'll just hook 2 maggots nice and thinly, ship out, and then to regulate my feed, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put 2 fingers and a thumb in my actual maggots, and that way I'll get about 15 maggots. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to actually feed twice, because that way I'll get 2 columns of maggots falling through, but I'll also get 2 lots of noise as well. So rig in, look at my float, in line with my marker, and I'm going to aim for my float. So I'm going to feed, and then feed again. I've got 2 lots of noise, 2 columns of bait falling through, so all of a sudden now, I've got some attraction. Now it might take a couple of feeds to notice, so we might still catch a few rudd and stuff like that to begin with, but hopefully we'll attract fish from further afar now. So again, keep that rig nice and still. Well, smaller fish, and this is what we don't want to be catching. So my maggots are fine, I've hooked him in the lip, my maggots are fine, they're not bust or anything, so I can go back in. So put my rig back in, and all them little fish will be eating these maggots, so don't worry about, you know, we're regulating our feed, we're only feeding about 15 maggots twice. So most of them will be getting ate by them little fish. When them little fish are in your peg, they're normally in shoals. You know, there'll be quite a lot of them down there. You can see there all again, another little fish. All these little mouths to feed, all of a sudden you can start feeding a little bit more bait. So this chuck, so one of my maggots there is just bust. So I'm going to keep one on because he's nice and fresh. Just put a second fresh one on. So this time I've been feeding 15 maggots. So this is how you work out how to up your feed, how to cut your feed back. When there's fish there, you don't need to attract them. So you don't need to feed as much bait because they're already in your peg. But if you're getting mithered by these little fish, you're probably not feeding enough bait to get through them to the bigger fish. So what I'm going to do now is use 3 fingers and a thumb. I'm going to take a slightly bigger pinch. So I've probably got 25 maggots. So now feed a little bit more bait. And that's how I'll sort of gauge my peg when I'm maggot fishing. You know, if all of a sudden my bites totally stop, I know I've probably fed a little bit too much, but I'll be doing things quickly based on the response of the fish. So if I'm getting bitted out, or what I'd class bitted out as, you know, I'm catching these smaller fish, then I might want to up my feed, see if I get a response. If I don't get a response, or I get no response from the fish, cut it back. And if I stop catching, you know, we've got other lines to look at then. Ooh, little bite then. So I'll put that rig back in. You know, you're not just going to catch on one line all day. But when the fish are there, you've got to make the most of them. Once you locate the fish, try and find the most efficient way of catching them. Whether it be via potting, by throwing, catapulting, whatever you may be doing. But all these little changes in your feeding will put extra fish in your net. That's another little fish, but he's a little bit slower that time. So hopefully there's a few bigger fish starting to linger about. So both the maggots were smashed that time, so this time I'm going to change my hook bait. Nice fresh hook bait on. Put that rig in. Feed again. Feed. Feed. There we go, that just proves that point there. It took about 5 minutes, you know, 2 or 3 rud, and then all of a sudden that little bit more feed, the peg just went a little bit quiet, and then we've hooked into an F1. That just proves the point of, like, you know, don't just sit there and carry on feeding a little bit of bait, You know, think about the amounts of bait you're feeding. Just up it slightly. It's a nice one. Just up your feed slightly, and hopefully the fish will respond to it. It's a nice fish, probably £2. Around his fin. So that's one thing you've got to be considering, you know. When you're feeding, don't just keep feeding them out and be happy that you're catching fish. Like, think about how you can catch them better stamp fish. You know, we don't want to be catching rudd and roach, we want to be catching them £2 F1s, not 1 ounce rudd and roach. So think about your feeding. You know, if you want to up your feed, just changing your maggots volume from, say, 15 twice every sort of 3 or 4 minutes to sort of 30 maggots every 3 or 4 minutes. Just doubling your feed, or, you know, 20 maggots, whatever it may be. In winter it might be 5 or 6 maggots, but if you're getting bitted out, trying up your feed, you've got the option there of, you know, either potting your bait and keeping it nice and tight, or loose feeding your bait and drawing it in. So hopefully now I can carry on as I'm going. If my bites tail off, I might be feeding too much, so I'll cut back and go back to my original 15 every, you know, twice every few minutes or whatever. But I'm always changing my bait, I'm always changing my volume of bait, and that's a good lesson, you know, not just with maggots, but with pellets or any other bait. You know, volume of feed, play about with it, don't just do the same thing all the time. So what I'm going to do now is look at another option that we've got, and that's fishing in the margins with pellets, which can be another killer tactic at this time of year.